Hi, everybody. This is Gino Vanelli. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the persons appearing on the program.
He's worked in Canadian television. He's worked in Canadian film. He's been part of the Canadian music industry for over 40 years when he got his start with PolyGram Records, where he worked with the likes of Kiss, Cher, the Bee Gees. Today on Rainbow Country, Gerry Young is my guest. All that and more on episode 343, so stay tuned. The Gay Talk Radio right here on Rainbow Country.
Hi, this is Emily Saliers from Indigo Girls.
Hey everyone, this is Chris Harder, porn star, burlesque performer, and the creator of Porn to Be a Star. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Well, hello and welcome to a brand new journey through Rainbow Country. As I like to call it, a little gay radio show working to give voice to the LGBT community and beyond. And as always, I am your tour guide through Rainbow Country. I'm producer and host, Mark Tara. By the way, Rainbow Country originates from CIUT FM in Toronto, and now proudly in syndication on 12 outlets across Canada, from coast to coast to coast. The Yukon, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, the east coast of Canada and Newfoundland, Ontario, even down to Buffalo, New York, and online. Well, thanks to you tuning in, streaming, downloading, but ultimately listening. Together, we continue to build Rainbow Country into a nationally syndicated gay radio show, a #1 LGBT podcast on Podomatic.com's Gay and Lesbian chart, as well as being recognized as Canada's #2 LGBT podcast on feedspot.com. So today, he is the president of Current Management. He's also been part of the Canadian music industry for over 40 years. He is Gerry Young. We'll find out about how he got into the Canadian music industry, how a muffin inspired him to start his own record company, and so much more. Plus in hour 2, music from LGBT artists, independent artists, voices that we've come to know and love in classic disco, classic 80s, classic house. And on this episode, I'm featuring some classic 80s, some lesbian rock, and more. That on episode 343. And our first stop is the Rainbow Country Bookstore. Today, British author Kirsty Lowe reads from her book, A Short History of Queer Women.
Lesbians have always been great at creating spaces for themselves. Take Polish immigrant Eva Kochiva, who in 1925 opened lesbian tea room Eve's Hangout in Greenwich Village, New York. Eve's Hangout was everything you would expect from a Greenwich Village lesbian tea room. There were regular poetry readings, dramatic musical presentations, intense group discussions, cat chat, sex chat, and tea chat. Eva also included men and had a sign on the door that said men are admitted but not welcome. And people say lesbians aren't funny. The bar was successful, but because a successful lesbian is a threat to humanity, the police ransacked the joint. During the raid, the police found Eva's collection of lesbian-centred sexual stories. Eva tried to pretend that they weren't anything to do with lesbianism, but the book's name, Lesbian Love, gave it away. Eva was arrested and charged with obscenity and disorderly conduct. She was deported back to Poland, but somehow managed to make her way to France, where she opened another lesbian tea room that was equally successful. Not long after, the Nazis invaded France. They didn't like Eva, or her successful lesbian tea room. She would be murdered along with thousands of other lesbians in Auschwitz. Just like today, dildos were a common accessory among queer women. only then they weren't as veiny. What's the deal with that? Italian stallion Caterina Vitani was known to carry a leather dildo between her legs and used it to bed over 100 women. Caterina began her bid for top shagger at just 14 years old when she fell in love with her embroidery teacher. The affair lasted for 2 years until the embroidery teacher's father caught them in bed. The father threatened to have Caterina arrested, so she left town and reinvented herself as Giovanni Bodoni. Giovanni was just as charming as Caterina and soon built up a reputation as a serial seducer. That is until she fell in love with the niece of a local minister. Giovanni wanted to marry her, but the minister forbid them from being together due to Giovanni's raunchy reputation. The couple didn't care and decided to get married in secret without the minister's blessing. Unfortunately for Giovanni, the minister found out before they could be married and shot Giovanni in the leg. In the hospital, minutes from death, Giovanni asked for a nun to come to her bed. She then confessed that she had been born a woman and wished to be buried in women's clothing. After Caterina Giovanni's death, a surgeon attempted to find an explanation for what he called those who followed the practices of Sappho. First, he removed the hymen, then the clitoris, followed by the fallopian tubes, the intestines, the liver, and the gallbladder. He then examined them all closely, making sure to use all his expertise and knowledge in the field of biology. And what did he find? Absolutely fuck all. Over in Colombia, Tatiana de la Tierra helped form one of the first international Latina lesbian magazines in the world. Tatiana wanted to empower Latina lesbians through writing and encourage them to challenge social norms. For example, one of her poems, Ode to Unsavory Lesbians, was designed to poke fun at heteronormative societal perceptions of beauty and ugliness, which worked because it's hilarious. Ode to Unsavory Lesbians. I love an ugly lesbian, one who walks with a limp, talks with a lisp, leaves her dentures out overnight by the bathroom sink, wears polyester pants and men's cologne, the cheap kind, has a beard so long she steps on it, sprouts warts on her toes, all 12 of them, carries a spittoon in her breast pocket, chortles at church people. Tatiana also wanted to include non-heterosexual material in the school curriculum. She believed that this would help prevent homophobia in the classroom, as well as educating students on the concept of identity. What a great idea, said nobody, because even today it's a struggle to find anything queer on the school syllabus. Before the AIDS epidemic, gay men and lesbians were often at loggerheads for their political and social differences. Many lesbians resented gay men for being the face of their community, believing them to be sex-crazed cokeheads swanning about in their tank tops, driven by the meat between their legs just like straight men. The feeling was mutual, with screams of "fish" ringing through the room whenever a lesbian walked into a gay bar. It shouldn't be funny, but the idea that someone would shout "fish" at me the moment I step foot in a gay bar really makes me laugh. When AIDS came along, everything changed. Lesbians volunteered to help look after the men who had been left alone in their hospital beds to die. They watched as hundreds and hundreds of young men crawled into the hospital, only to be diagnosed with something that they had never heard of and thrown back out. In a couple of months they would return to die or be used as guinea pigs. To make matters worse, there was a shortage of blood, because gay men had been banned from donating. But, once again, the lesbians stepped up and volunteered their services. One of these lesbians was Barbara Vick, who struck up a deal with a private San Diego blood bank that let donors designate who would receive their blood donations. The San Diego Blood Sisters soon set to work and over the next 5 years organised several blood drives. Barbara knew that although lesbians weren't at the forefront of the disease, they had to do everything in their power to help those who had suffered. There was no longer a divide between gay men and lesbians. It was now an attack on the community. But it wasn't just lesbians who got involved. Meetings to discuss the epidemic were put together by various groups throughout the community. All sorts of lives, All sorts of races, sexualities, genders. There was no time for animosity, no time for separatism, politics, or agendas. Everybody had a role, and everybody needed to do their part. So they did. To this day, no apology has ever been made to the LGBTQIA+ community, and in 2016, Hillary Clinton tried praising the Reagans for their handling of the epidemic, saying, "Because of both President and Miss Reagan, in particular Miss Reagan, we started a national conversation where nobody would talk about it, nobody wanted to do anything about it." Not only a huge, great, stinking lie, this also served to erase the thousands and thousands of activists who actually did talk about it while nobody was doing anything to help. Look, I like you, Hillary. Really, I do. You should have been president, but spare us the bullshit.
Hi, I'm Saida Garrett, co-writer of Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mr. Mark Tara.
Up next, Gerry Young.
Iconic rock legend Frank Zappa, formerly of the band Mothers of Invention, showed up to perform at Maple Leaf Gardens and do some promotional interviews around Toronto in support of his latest album, Chic Your Booty. The show was being presented by the biggest rock radio station in the city, Chum FM. And the day before the show, Frank and myself took a limo to the station so that Frank could do a live-on interview. Frank was known for often writing obscenity-laced lyrics for his songs, which included titles like Crew Slut, Don't Eat the Yellow Snow, I'm the Slime, and Susie Cream Cheese. During the interview with Chum FM DJ Rick Moranis, later of SCTV and Hollywood movie fame, Zappa noticed that the station's associate program director, Duff Roman, had put masking tape over some of the tracks off all his records so that they couldn't be played on the air by the DJs because Roman felt they were too sexually explicit. Frank was rightfully incensed about it because he felt that Chum FM was censoring his record, and without warning, he suddenly went ballistic on the air. Instead of walking out of the station in protest like some artists might do, he launched into a 20-minute obscenity-laced tirade against Chum FM on the air, and a visibly shaken Moranis was left almost speechless. The next morning, the day of the show, Frank and I visited a competing radio station on the outskirts of Toronto called CFNY, now a downtown alternative radio station called 102.1 The Edge, which was more of an alternative and gutsy radio station that music director David Marston ran more than Chum FM, and one that didn't bother to put masking tape over any of the tracks Frank's extensive catalog of albums. They happily played anything and everything Frank requested during the hour-long interview, including some of his raunchiest tracks. He loved the CFNY guys, and they were thrilled he'd come by and done such a long interview with them. They were self-promoting enough to give Frank a large supply of CFNY t-shirts, which of course Frank ordered his road crew to wear that night at the show, much to the chagrin of the many Chum execs in attendance who had done all the heavy lifting promoting the appearance for a number of weeks. Apparently, you messed with Frank at your own peril.
Gerry Young, hello. Hi, how are you?
Hi, Mark. Nice to talk to you.
I have to say, Gerry Young, thank you for being here to have your voice, your story be heard by the LGBT community and beyond. So thank you for that, especially to talk about the Canadian music scene.
Right.
Okay, the Juno Awards. As we're recording our interview, they will be airing on Monday, March 13th on CBC. Let's start there. Will you be tuning in?
I'll probably tune in, sure. I don't have an artist up for an award this year, but I will definitely tune in because we won in the past.
You have some of the acts that you've worked with.
Well, yeah, we got 2 singles of the year for Echo Beach in 1980 for the Martha and the Muffins, And 1983, the Juno Award for Single of the Year for the Parachute Club, Rise Up.
So in regards to the Juno Awards, what's your take on the Juno Awards in 2023? Do you think they're still relevant? Are they more relevant today? Are they about the same? What's your take on the Juno Awards?
I think in the past they were probably more important, only because of the, it was radio and there was video, and that was about it. Now you're talking online and thousands of sites and everything else. And, where they have polls, who's the best group, who's the best artist, the best female, etc. Now, they may be international, they may be in Canada, but there's so many people who will play your music now, whether that's good or bad, I'm not sure, because the rules with the CRTC and stuff. But in fact, there's thousands of podcasts will play your music, and it doesn't add up to much revenue, but it diffuses sort of the importance of the Juno Awards, like they were the Canadian award show. Simple as that. And in terms of music, and that's not the case anymore. Of course, it's the major Canadian music award show still, but as I say, the listener is now looking at other things, not just necessarily the mainstream acts that get up for Juno Awards.
You've been part of the Canadian music scene since the 70s, I believe.
That's right. In 1977, I was working in television for TV Ontario in production and enjoying myself there and having a good time. And a friend approached me who was the PolyGram promotion manager in Toronto. And he called me and said, would you consider joining the record business? I said, well, what would I do? And he said, well, you go around and we give you a car and you go around and you push, we give you a good salary, a car. You go around and you push certain records we're high on, and we've got one of the best rosters in the world, a third of the airplay chart toppers. So, that's fine. And plus, when the artists come to town, you take care of them. And I thought, and you have an expense account. So I thought, well, maybe it's time that I got out of production and television for a while and tried this out. And I didn't really expect to stay or anything else. And I worked at PolyGram 3 years, eventually became the promotion manager when Jean-Marie left, who was my friend. That was the start of it. And then in 1980, things changed when Martha and the Muffins had a big hit called Echo Beach.
So before we get into that, there are some records behind you. What are those records behind you? And please explain.
Okay, this one here is a platinum record, and that's for the Parachute Club. And it was for their second album at the Pied de la Moon, and 100,000 records sold in Canada. This award here is a gold record for Martha and the Muffins and their first album, Metro Music, that contained Echo Beach. And also the Parachute Club have a couple of gold records and singles. And Martha and the Muffins have a gold single as well for Echo Beach.
Okay, so Kiss, Peter Gabriel, the Bee Gees, PolyGram Records. I believe they're now known as PolyGram Entertainment.
That's correct.
You were part of PolyGram Records. So your time, you just gave us how you got into it, but your time at PolyGram Records, those must have been some heady times for you.
It was pretty interesting, I'll tell you, because it isn't that I'm dazzled by recording artists or musicians or people who are famous or anything, but there was a steady stream. I mean, I'd worked with Harry Belafonte before in television. I'd worked with Buffy St. Marie in television, a number of musical artists. But when you joined PolyGram, you got into the middle of the record business, and that included, as I say, PolyGram had a third of the chart acts that were happening. So, I walked around and I was welcomed to almost every radio station because they knew that I was the man who was providing the singles for them that they were playing all the time. And of course, the artists kept flowing and coming to town. I mean, as you said, Kiss, Dire Straits, it went on, the Bee Gees, the Village People. It went on and on. From 77 to 80, I'd say we probably had 150 acts come to town over those 3 years. And I'd have to see them all, of course, and introduce myself and say hello. And provide, of course, the entertainment if they wanted a party or something and that kind of thing. Then we'd throw them a record party, invite the press and whatever, and the radio people to that kind of thing. So we promote, basically, make sure that all the people who like them in the area got to see them and talk to them or whatever.
So what would you be doing then, being head of promotions there at PolyGram Records at the time? Talk to me about what you would be doing.
Well, I had a staff of 2 or 3 people, and basically I took care of the big stations. When I was promotion manager, I took the Chums and the important stations in Toronto. My assistant would take care of the other stations, around the province of Ontario, in smaller towns, not necessarily that small, places like London, Sarnia, whatever, Kitchener, whatever. Drop in and see these people, Ottawa, say hello to them. Here are the stations we're dealing with. Say hello, go meet the music director. And so they had to do what I had to do originally, was see the utter frontiers of radio in the hinterland, so to speak, and make sure that they were, playing our songs and hearing our songs and making decisions on them, and for their community. And of course, I took care of the big stations. And when the bands come to town, I'd sort of direct how, what the band needed, like whether we were going to do a press party or whether we were going to do a limousine or whether, whatever. So as I say, pretty well every time any of these artists came to town, we did a party for them, a press party for them.
Your time at PolyGram Records, did you have any favorite artists of yours?
Well, I'll tell you, I guess the favorite artists are the people I dealt with, not necessarily their music, but the actual people they were. And, I love Peter Gabriel and I love his music, but he was such a gentleman and such a nice guy that I was taken aback, and I like him a lot more than I probably like his music, even though I like it a lot. And Cher was the same. I was not only dazzled, but she was so polite and so down to earth. At one point, she came to me and said, "Gerry, at a party we threw for a disco club called Heaven in downtown Toronto at Yonge and Bloor." She said, it was about 100 people there, I guess, in the press and radio, and, all trying to be near and everything. And I was taking, they were trying to mob her, sort of. So I was taking her into a private room where she could do quick interviews and meet certain people. And when we walked into that room where she was going to do, short interviews or whatever, she saw a poster and it said, Cher, the new album. And underneath it, it said PolyGram, Casablanca. And of course, she wasn't familiar with PolyGram. She was only familiar with her label, which was Casablanca. So she said to me, "Who's PolyGram?" I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I'm from PolyGram. And this party is provided by PolyGram. And we promote your record in Canada. That's PolyGram." She says, "Well, I thought you were with Casablanca." No. So I had to straighten her out of that, and I'm sure she had some nice words for Casablanca when she got back to LA.
And on that note, we will return after this Rainbow Country update.
Hi, this is Michael Anthony Alago, music executive, photographer, author, and you are listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Hitmakers is a full-service, award-winning record label and social enterprise based in Iqaluit, Nunavut. We specialize in the creating and marketing of world-class Inuit and Indigenous music, including pop, hip-hop, rock, folk, and traditional Inuit music. Hitmakers has studios in Iqaluit, Ottawa, and Toronto. The label currently works with more than 20 Inuit and Indigenous artists, and we represent and promote many more. The company was founded in 2016, and our mission is to create viable careers in the arts for Inuit and Indigenous artists through music, media, and education. Our secondary mission is to empower artists to share and strengthen their stories and culture. To To learn more, please connect with us on social media or at hitmakers.com. That's hitmakers with a Z. Thanks for listening. Koyanami.
Well, it is a brand new month. We are in March, and how is 2023 treating you? Well, I've got some fresh episodes coming up featuring gay voices, lesbian voices, funny voices, as well as coverage of Big Brother Canada Season 11. All that and more lies ahead as we head into spring 2023, right here on Rainbow Country.
Hi, I'm Paul Poirier, Canadian champion in ice dance and 3-time Olympian, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Terra.
Okay, so Gerry Young, is it true that because of a muffin that you ended up starting your own record company, Current Records and Management? Is this because of a muffin?
Well, it's because of Martha and the Muffins. I won't say it's a muffin. It's because of Martha and the Muffins. And how that happened is I was managing them after we got rid of Virgin Records, and we were on our last album with them. And the reason I say it was the last album is because Richard Branson, the head of Virgin, kept undercutting the band. And so, he'd say, well, I know the third album calls for $100,000 or $120,000. I'll give you 100 or 90. He'd always cut it short. So I put up with it, and the band put up with it for one album, and that was the third album, aptly called "This Is the Ice Age," and which sort of was our feelings toward Virgin at that point. And I got a call from the band's lawyer, who I didn't know very well. I'd only met him when I signed on to manage them. And he said, I'd like to talk to you. Would you come to the office? And I said, sure. So I went go down to the office and said, hi, Joe, what's up? He said, well, I want to give you a check for $5,000. I said, what for? He said, well, you've been very good to the band, and you've done a lot for them, and I know you're not making a real good salary, making any salary apart from what you're doing. So I want to give you, $5,000 and say we really appreciate it. I have a friend of mine who's also a lawyer, and we want to know if you'd like to start a record company. I said, well, yeah, I'd like to start a record company, but of course, we need a lot of money to start a record company, so I don't have that kind of money. No, but we can get it. And I said, how could you get it? Well, Brian, the partner I'm talking about, is also a lawyer, and he's the inheritor of Teck Gold Mines. I said, oh, okay. So he said, let's, I'll see you in a couple of weeks, and I'll set something up, and you and I and Brian can go out and have dinner and talk. I said, okay, it's fine. So, make a long story short, we did, and when it came time for Virgin to re-sign for the fourth album, Martha and the Muffins, Richard did what I expected. And he said, we'll give you 90,000, whatever. It was called for 110,000 in the contract. And where I had to take it before, on This Is the Ice Age album, the third album, I said to him, no, you pay us the whole amount of money, Richard, or we're leaving. And we have the right to walk, because you haven't lived up to the contract. Contract calls for $110,000. And he said, oh, I'd really like to afford it. Mind you, this is the year of Culture Club, where they made millions and millions of dollars off that band. And so he said, I'd like to help you. I just don't have the money. I said, well, I'd like to help you too, Richard, but sorry, we don't have it either. And we want to go get it somewhere else. He said, well, you haven't had a big hit. I don't think you'll get very far. You might get, I don't know, but blah, blah, blah. We keep hoping you have another hit like Echo Beach. And I said, well, we just might, but it won't be with you. So he wouldn't, make a long story short, he wouldn't give us the money. And when I hung up the phone, I immediately called Joe Fedor, the lawyer, and said, we're free. And so, sure enough, the release papers came in the mail a week or two later. And we were off and running with Current Records, and we signed Martha and the Muffins for their fourth album at the full price of $125,000, which is what the fourth album called for in the original version contract, which we never would have gotten from Richard. And that success of that fourth record, called Mystery Walk, which had Black Stations, White Stations, one of the biggest hits in dance clubs across the States that year in 1984. Joe and Brian said, Gerry, go find another band. This is a great band. Go find another good Canadian band or a great Canadian band that we can keep an eye on. So, I said, well, easier said than done, but, I'll keep my eyes open. And in time, I guess a month or so, 2 months, pretty well in the area of the time we were talking, I got a call from Richard O'Brien, who was the owner of the Bamboo Club in Toronto. He's dead now, unfortunately, but it was the hottest reggae club and every other kind of club in Toronto. And it was the hottest club in Toronto at that time. It was about 1983, I guess we're talking, 1983, 84. And he called me up and said, Gerry, I'm opening a club called the Bamboo Club. But right now I'm hosting a party at an after-hours club this Saturday night. And it's called MBC. It's in the Warehouse District in Toronto. It's just basically an abandoned building, but with the PA all set up and everything else. And there's a band I want you to see. Because he knew what I was doing with Current Records and Martha and Muffins. And I said, well, what's the band? He said, the Parachute Club. I said, well, I've never heard of them. He said, no, nobody's heard of them. He says, they're friends of mine. I just know them. I said, oh, okay. So I'll come down. So I went down at the warehouse about 2 a.m, I guess, and the band came on. And I'd never seen anything like it. They were absolutely thrilling. And Lorraine Segata was a star. And I was blown away. And this is an undiscovered, unhyped, unrecorded band. And I just was flipped over them. So I went back stage afterwards, and Rick introduced me to them. And I said, look, I run a small record company. And I think you guys are great. Might be interested in recording an album with you. I don't know how you feel about that, et cetera, et cetera. And they jumped pretty well on board after, a few weeks getting to know me and that kind of thing. And I said, okay, let's start writing some songs. So we gave them, an advance and a writing advance and said, go write some songs. So they went down to Trinidad and Tobago. They thought they could write better down there. So they went down and fine, we didn't care what they did with the few $1,000s we gave them. They came back with some songs. It was worth it. And they came back after about 10 days. I guess 3 or 4 of the people of the band went down and they came back. It was particularly Lorraine Segata and Billy Bryan's drummer, they were the co-leaders of the band. And they said, well, here we've got 4 or 5 songs here. What do you think of these? And one of the songs was Rise Up. And I said, well, these 5 are fine. Go write another 5. So in short order, they wrote another 5. And I then looked around for a producer who I thought I could trust and who would really do a good job with them. And of course, who came to mind but Daniel Lanois, who'd done Martha and the Muffins, and of course was going to go on to do Bob Dylan and everybody else. So we got lucky there. Danny said, loved the band too. He just heard their tapes and he loved them. So then we went down to Hamilton Grand Avenue Studios and Danny's studio and recorded there. And over the spring and summer, I guess of 83. And sure enough, in 84, they had a hit single.
So with Current Records, who were some of the other acts that you had on Current Records?
Well, we started out with, as I say, we started with Martha Muffins, then the Parachute Club. Then I signed a fellow who left the Boomtown Rats, a band I'd met through PolyGram, of course. And they had a hit with I Don't Like Mondays. And the lead guitarist was named Gerry. And I ran into him at MIDEM in Cannes, France, a music conference, one spring, I guess in 84. And I said, hey, Gerry, what are you doing now that you've left the Boomtown Rats? He said, "Oh, I'm, looking around, came here to meet some people, but, I'd like to do my own record and, etc." I never had really a chance with the Boomtown Rats to do my own stuff. I said, "Oh, well, we might be interested." I thought, anybody from the Boomtown Rats and the lead guitarist, let's hear what he has to do. So Gerry Cott came out with not enough for an album, but enough for a great EP. And the EP was called I Left My Hat in Haiti. And the key song on that 5-song EP was Alphabet Town. And Alphabet Town was basically a great track that did well in underground circles. It didn't do well in the pop circle, but it did. It went on stations in the 88, CFNY, stations like this. It went on. So it got that underground scene going. So that's one of the things. Another artist I dealt with is a band out of Calgary called Mystery. And that was an English guy, Gerry Cott, of course, who I brought to Canada, and he did the album here in Toronto. As far as other bands, Mystery Romance was the next band. They're from Calgary. Actually, they have a new single out now called Story of We, and it's a video as well. And it's great. And they're doing very well. I'm tracking that for them, and they're doing very well. So Mystery Romance, they came out with their album back then. And let's see, they had a single called So Far Away and a few other things with a video. Let's see, other bands I signed. Oh, God.
Did you have Altamota?
Altamota, there you go.
Molly Johnson.
Molly Johnson, Altamota. I basically, I don't know if I'd say discovered them, but I hung around on Queen Street a lot during the 80s. And one of the places on Queen Street is the Cameron House. Molly, it's a hotel bar in the back type thing. So, and Molly lives there. So I lived, and a number of other musicians lived there as well at that time. So I met Molly, of course, when I'd hang around the bar of, et cetera. And so I ran into her one day and, et cetera, and said, what are you doing for it? She said, well, I'd really like to do a record. And I said, well, I've seen you. You're great live. Have you got songs? She says, well, my partner's Norman Ornstein, and he's a guitarist. And he thinks we have the songs for sure, and I do too. I said, okay, let's hear them. Of course, they came out with a great debut album in, I guess it was 86, 87. And it was just fantastic. And of course, the key song in that video was Julian. And that did quite well on the charts.
In 2016, some of those acts that you just mentioned, Altamota, Gerry Cott, also, I believe, Strange Advance. They had
that's another one I didn't mention. Strange Advance, of course. That was a funny story, actually, how I got them. Dean Cameron, rest in peace, who was the president of Capitol Records. He was quite a shooter. He came to me one day, and he'd had Strange Advance on Capitol Records for their career. With We Run and a few other key tracks. And he phoned me up one day out of the blue. I had no arrangement with Capitol. I worked with other labels pretty well, but I'd never worked with Capitol. And he phoned me up one day and he said, Gerry, it's Dean, I want to ask you a favor. I said, sure. What can I do for you? He said, well, I want to know if you'd be willing to manage Strange Advance. I said, well, sure. I'd consider managing them. Why? What's going on? He said, well, there's some weird things going on here at Capitol, and I'd like them on current. And you manage them, and Capitol will distribute it, but it would be on current, and you manage them. But I'll pay for it, the record. And I said, well, something certainly to consider. And of course, we did the record, and the record was called The Distance Between. And it had a key song on it called Love Becomes Electric, and a video as well. It did quite well. Strange Advance is coming back. Molly Johnson, of course, just won the Governor General's Award, I believe. And here she was hanging around a bar at the Cameron House years ago.
And in 2016, they all had re-releases, like remasters.
Yeah, that's
so well
true.
done.
No, what's old is new again type thing.
How did those come about in 2016?
Well, basically, it's a case of that the people were suggesting that should happen, that these should be re-released and they should come up with new stuff and whatever. And the bands are credible and have a reputation, and that they should re-release their old stuff. And so basically we put together with all the fans that they would basically, on their own platform, they could re-release everything else and all the rest of it. And so that was fine.
You've been part of the Canadian music scene since the 1970s. You've done TV, you've done film. 1981, Porky's, starring Kim Cattrall from Sex and the City.
Yeah.
I believe you were the music supervisor for this now cult classic film. How did you get involved with Porky's?
Well, that's a funny story too. I went to university at Concordia University in Montreal, and one of the fellows I met there was Don Carmody. And Don Carmody, we both took film and television production. And he graduated and I graduated. We both graduated. I went into television, the TVO, and he decided to become a freelance director. And I don't think he had a couple of good years starting out, but he stuck with it. And sure enough, in 1980, he approached me and said, "Hey, Gerry, I've got a movie I'm doing with Hollywood, and it's called Porky's." I said, "Uh-huh." And he said, "It's about a summer camp thing, and I can think, but we want a good soundtrack to it. It could be, and because you're with PolyGram or have relations with PolyGram, you could probably do this." And I said, "Yeah, I probably could." So basically, we put together the soundtrack out of the PolyGram catalog, and for a fair enough price, and that was used on the soundtrack of Porky's.
You've also written a memoir, Pop Goes the Weasel.
Pop Goes the Weasel, right? Rock and roll off the record.
5 out of 5 stars on Amazon.ca. How did you... Okay, first of all, what inspired you to write a memoir back in 2011?
I think the fact that, I'm getting on back in the 70s and 80s and 90s when I was really happening with a lot of bands and we were getting the awards and the attention, and meeting all the bands I met through PolyGram and going through the funny stories. I mean, I could name almost any artist I dealt with had something going for it, and it was funny. And so I thought I should probably put down. So I started thinking of, what's an example? And of course, Little Richard, taking him around to a fan's store, clothing store, who was going to give him a suit or a T-shirt or something from the store. And Richard walked in and said, "Where's the leather?" And immediately went down and picked out a leather suit worth $700. So these are stories that I think had to be shared. Another one was the Village People. We rented a boat at Harbourfront, and it was a boat you could basically have a party on. So we had hired a tank to come down. We had in the Navy motif with the boat. We had all kinds of things going on regarding the Village People persona. So one day, the biker, who was the lead singer, I believe, he was, of course, dressed after the show at the Maple Leaf Gardens. We came down to the boat for the party, and the band came down to the boat. And of course, there's about 200 people there from the media. And of course, the band shows up, and there's all kinds of stuff. And of course, there's people just surrounding them. And, for autographs or talk to them or touch them or whatever. And the party went on. And I was, of course, sort of walking around, eyeballing, making sure everybody was having a decent time. There were no problems. And as the crowd was thinning out, I noticed that the lead singer, in his leather outfit, biker outfit, was standing alone. I thought, well, waiting for somebody, but he shouldn't be standing alone. I would think that, the last time I was here, there was 10 people around. So I walked around and went to some other place, came back. And now almost everybody's gone. And he's standing there alone again. So I walked up to him, and I forget his name right now, but I said, is there anything, can I get you a cab? I mean, your hotel's right next door, Harbor Castle. If I get you a cab, I can't get you a limo for a drive half a block away, but if you want, he said, no, it's okay. I'll just go home. So I think he was pretty upset that he couldn't find anybody who'd spend the night with him or anything else.
Fascinating.
It was a funny story. And there's all kinds of funny stories.
And the title, Pop Goes the Weasel, where does that come from?
Yeah, I'll tell you where that comes from. All my life, I've had, whether it was my older brother or when I got into the record business, they call people who are in promotion in the record business record weasels. So my brother used to call me a weasel when I was like 7 years old. And when I got into the record business, I was basically a promotion weasel or a record weasel. So pop goes the weasel. Rock and roll off the record.
In 2023, you're still managing artists. Who are you currently managing and working with?
Well, I'm working with Betty Moon out of Los Angeles. And Betty Moon is just a fantastic artist. Also working with Universal Honey of Saskatchewan, who are a big Canadian band and used to be in the original Pursuit of Happiness. Let's see, who else am I working with? Working with a band from Calgary, Mystery Romance. And working with an electronic artist by the name of Milo from Windsor. Those are the 4 artists I'm working with right now.
So in 2023, what still motivates you? What still keeps you hyped, so to speak, when it comes to Canadian music?
The songs. It's all in the music. I mean, if a song turns me on, if I can't have anything to do with a band, I want to know what the band's about. And I want to listen to the song again. I'm a real fan of music. And so when I hear something that's good, if the band needs help, I'll try and help. If they don't need help, I'll just enjoy them. But music is the key.
Do you think in Canada we have a Canadian sound when it comes to music?
That's hard to say. I mean, I look at the Parachute Club. Is that Canadian? Look at Martha and the Muffins. Is that Canadian? Look at this guy Milo from Windsor. Is that Canadian electronic pop? I don't know. I really don't know if there's a Canadian sound. There used to be. They used to call Bachman Turner Overdrum Wheatfield Soul because they thought that was the prairie sound. But I don't know if there's really a Canadian sound anymore. I think things have just gotten too diverse, and the input from, Martha and the Muffins were influenced by the English bands. Parachute Club were introduced by the reggae bands. Everybody's influenced by somebody else. And as time goes on and more bands and more artists come to the forefront, really nationality becomes unimportant, I think. I think it's the songs, always.
The name, the title, current records, current management.
Right.
Where does that come from?
As I was sitting down with the 2 lawyers I got into the partnership with, of course, the conversation got around. We actually thought it might happen. We had to come up with a name. So I said, well, look, because I'm the record guy, the other 2 guys were lawyers. I said, look, whatever we do has to be current. It has to be now. It has to be happening now. So they said, why don't we just call it current? I said, okay.
So before I let you go, I have 3 quick questions. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Red or white?
Red.
Day or night?
Day.
Echo Beach or Rise Up?
Do I I have to? Yeah, I just got somebody whispering in the background, Echo Beach. And I'll say Echo Beach for this reason only. Not because it was bigger than Rise Up or better than Rise Up or anything like that. Because it was the first band I've been associated with. So I'd say Echo Beach.
Well said, well said. Gerry Young, well said, well done. Well recorded, well made, well written. Everything that you've done. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mark, very much. Really appreciate it.
Sherry Lynn Sarkisian, better known as Cher, was the exact opposite of Donna Summer. Meeting and hanging out with her was an absolute pleasure, and actually one of the highlights of my time at PolyGram, mostly because she was incredibly so down to earth. Cher wasn't in town for our show, but to promote her new Casablanca Records solo release called The Prisoner, which displayed her on the cover in one of her flamboyant, feathered Bob Mackie, disco-influenced costumes that helped define her career. Instead of setting up a bunch of interviews for her at her hotel, as we would normally do, we rented an upscale disco called Heaven in the heart of Toronto for a media party. This would include most of the press, TV, and radio people in the city, along with some of Toronto's notable club kids that would add some street feel to the event. I picked Cher up at her hotel in a limo, and she looked breathtakingly beautiful in a short, skin-tight silver sequin dress that on her seemed somehow understated, but absolutely perfect for the event. I'm rarely blown away by the sight of any woman, but if ever there was a time, this was probably it. As we rode towards the club, she asked me a number of things about the evening, like who was going to be there, what she was going to be required to do, etc., etc. I assured her that all she had to do was follow me around and I'd introduce her to any of the press that mattered. I told her that we had a special VIP room off to the side inside the club, where she could retreat at any time and where we could also do interviews and take photos of her with various record retailers and important media people in attendance. When we entered the club, she was immediately surrounded by the usual jaded members of the Fourth Estate, who sneered at any overwrought attention to celebrity, but were now in full press mode to get close to her. I quickly hustled Cher away from the throng as it was starting to get out of control and led her into the VIP room where we started to bring various members of the media in one by one to do short interviews with her and take some photos. Meanwhile, the rest of the large crowd was in the main room drinking, eating hors d'oeuvres, and dancing while her new album played on the powerful club speakers, which made any conversation almost impossible. As I watched this beautiful, composed, and very together lady handle each media person she met with an endearing mix of respect and gratitude for their interest in her, I was impressed by her professionalism and the way she treated people she had never met and would probably never meet again. I was, however, somewhat taken aback when after about 45 minutes, she tapped me on the shoulder and over the pounding music said, "Gerry, who's PolyGram?" Cher had obviously never left the United States on a promo tour for The Prisoner because I guess she assumed, and no one had told her otherwise, that Casablanca was her label and distributed around the world, when in fact it was only her label in the US. I had been with her for over an hour, but until she saw a large billboard promoting her album in the VIP room of Heaven with a PolyGram logo on it, she had thought I was a Casablanca rep in Toronto and that this was the Casablanca Records party. I explained to her over the noise of the sound system that PolyGram was a European conglomerate that actually owned Casablanca Records and distributed their product around the world. And that Casablanca was simply a boutique label set up in Los Angeles and run by Neil Bogart, primarily to sign disco acts like her. To be honest, I found it pretty strange that a woman who was not only extremely talented and professional, but seemingly intelligent, was naive enough and not prepped enough by her handlers to know who was promoting or distributing her record outside the U.S. Regardless, Cher was then, and still is today, a huge star, and the party celebrating her album's release was a great success and fun for everyone. When I dropped her off at her hotel at the end of the evening, she seemed very happy about everything we had done for her, and all the attention she had gotten at the party. However, judging by the short conversation I had with her at the party about Casablanca's relationship to PolyGram, I got the feeling that she would probably have a few choice words for her management, Neil Bogart, and Casablanca, when she returned to LA for not filling her in.
Gerry Young's 2011 memoir, Pop Goes the Weasel, on Amazon.ca has a rating of 5 out of 5 stars. And for all things young, Gerry Young, check out the website, currentmanagement.com.
Magnus Hirschfeld made the modern homosexual. He co-founded the world's first gay rights group, the Scientific Humanitarian Committee, in Berlin in 1897. But what is far more important is that he and his colleagues came up with an enormously influential concept of what same-sex desire was, what it meant, and how it fit into the wider world. If you think homosexuality is an inborn quality that cannot be changed and has a biological root, but is not an illness, and if you think gay people are a sexual minority who are born that way and who deserve legal protections just as racial minorities do, you owe those ideas to Hirschfeld and a handful of others. He was among the first to articulate that conceptual model of what it means to be gay in print in 1896.
We just heard professor, author, and historian of queer and trans politics, Lori Marhofer, reading from Racism and the Making of Gay Rights, a sexologist, his student, and the Empire of Queer Love, their powerful new gay history book, about the man who made the modern homosexual, a German physician and sexologist who died at the age of 67 in 1935. Magnus Hirschfeld.
The phone rings. I got a message from the mayor. He's going to call me back the next day. I get the call, and he said, if you'd accept, we'd like to honor you with the key to the city. There was an event later that year in May. Just a key, right? Like, key to what? A decent job, a good singing career. It's really a metaphor, but it's history. So a reporter wants to talk to me and says, so it's a key, right? Like, what's the big deal? I said, well, not everybody gets the key. So I looked it up, and I guess it is kind of a big deal.
The date, May 17th, 2018, when trans activist Susan Gapka made history by becoming the first trans woman to be presented with the key to the city of Toronto. By the way, past recipients include Rush and the Raptors. And just like that, this little gay journey through Rainbow Country has come to an end. For the full 2-hour episode, head over to marktara.com, where everything is connected, and hit the archives banner. To keep up to date with the show, check out my socials at Mark Tara. The podcast is available on all major platforms, including audible.com and iHeartRadio. And finally, I want to take this time to thank you for taking your time to be with me. Remember, we are living in days of making dreams come true, so believe in yourself, and the world will believe in you.
Hi, this is Police Constable Danielle Botno, also known as LGBT Cop, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara